Good evening. This is Wednesday, January 18th, 293 days until the 2012 presidential election. We knew the protest would be massive. Nobody dreamed it would be effective enough to make 5 senators, including 2 co-sponsors, turn on a dime by mid-afternoon to oppose one of the congressional threats to censor and potentially damage the internet. The 5th story in the countdown. Breaking news tonight. SOPA and PIPA, the House and Senate bills, which supporters say will help media firms fight online privacy and save millions of America's jobs, are in trouble tonight. Opponents who insist that they are merely heavy-handed attempts to shut down sites accused of using other people's material that will undermine the internet struck back today with online protests that are indeed turning Congress around. Among the protests, Wikipedia, the user-edited free encyclopedia that millions rely on for information. Wired, the online version of the leading technology magazine. Google, the most popular American search engine. And Greenpeace, the environmental organization, warning the proposed laws could kill it by allowing corporate targets to claim their intellectual property rights had been violated. Chris Dodd, former U.S. Senator, now CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America and a SOPA PIPA backer, seemed incensed at Wikipedia in particular.
This is irresponsible for them. Offshore criminals are stealing American jobs and content. Everyone says we ought to stop that. Everyone says that.
Well, no, sir, not everyone. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying that. The AFL-CIO, the Recording Industry of America, and Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, but not the Obama administration, which announced Saturday, appropriately enough in a blog, quote, "We will not support legislation that reduces freedom of expression, increases cybersecurity risk, or undermines the dynamic, innovative global internet." Hit hard by today's online protests. Congressional supporters of SOPA and PIPA last seen falling over themselves as they tried to back off the damn thing. So while the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid insists he'll bring PIPA up for a vote next week, Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio, one of the co-sponsors, announced on his Facebook page today, "I've decided to withdraw my support for the Protect IP Act. Furthermore, I encourage Senator Reid to abandon his plan to rush the bill to the floor." The Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn adding, "Concerns about unintended damage to the internet and innovation in the tech sector require a more thoughtful balance, which will take more time." The Beltway journal The Hill now reporting there are 3 more senators who withdrew their support earlier tonight. Key among them, John Boozman of Arkansas and Republican colleague Orrin Hatch of Utah, who had been among PIPA's co-sponsors. The 5th new retreat from Senator Blunt of Missouri, one of the Republican leaders. Other senators who had already rejected the bill included Republicans Jim DeMint of South Carolina, Scott Brown of Massachusetts, Susan Collins of Maine, the Democrats Mark Udall and Jeff Merkley, and, of course, Democratic Senator Ron Wyden, Merkley's colleague in Oregon, a leader in the fight against these bills, and my guest on this news hour in a few moments. The House also apparently backing away from its bill. Speaker Boehner showing little appetite for SOPA.
It's pretty clear to many of us that there's a lack of consensus at this point. And I would expect that the committee would continue to work to try to build a consensus before this bill moves.
No, and there were street protests, too, outside the offices of 2 PIPA supporters, New York Democratic Senators Schumer and Gillibrand. Tim Carr of media reform group Free Press telling the assembled crowd thusly.
If you try to pass a bill that takes away the open architecture of the internet, you're going to have a problem. If you try to pass a bill that threatens free speech and innovation online, you're going to have a problem.
They already have a problem, but Motion Picture Association CEO Dodd insisting the only real problem is his problem.
The 2 basic arguments, it denies freedom of speech and it breaks the internet, are totally without merit. And forcing me to have to adjust my model to your model of giving something away is not exactly what we ought to be encouraging.
As I mentioned, Oregon Democratic Senator Ron Wyden has been a leader in this fight against the Senate version of the bill that could both censor and damage the internet, and there's many people in line behind him in the Senate tonight. Senator, good evening.
Thanks for having me back, Keith.
Our pleasure. Obviously, there seems to be a rush for the door on this. What do we think has happened today when 2 co-sponsors and 5 Republicans in total, actually 3 co-sponsors, rushed to say they're no longer in support of it, and Majority Leader Reid is still pushing to bring this thing to the floor? What's happening now?
This has been a day for the history books, Keith, with scores of websites talking about the dangers of web censorship. We already know that millions of Americans value a free and open internet. They're making sure their voices are heard. Now, the deciding vote is going to be next Tuesday in the Senate at 2:15, because that will really determine whether or not PIPA and the House bill, SOPA, go forward, or whether or not we can have a more thoughtful and sober discussion. So we want to make sure that folks who are speaking out today continue to do it.
You think that vote is going to happen, or is this retreat suggesting that perhaps discretion will be the better part of the valor on this piece of legislation?
What I've been trying to communicate to the leadership on both sides of the aisle is that vote on Tuesday is simply premature. If we're going to find a way to strike a balance where you can combat copyright infringement without doing enormous damage to the internet, we are going to simply have to take a bit more time to reflect on this. You can't go to the floor with a complicated piece of legislation and just do this from the seat of your pants. What we've got to do is make sure that we're not getting into the censorship area. The PIPA bill does that in its present form. The definitions are way too broad. They could apply to almost anything. And I'm particularly concerned that it authorizes private rights of action, which essentially lets the big incumbent firms and companies muscle around the small folks who are the innovators who are going to get us the new jobs.
The rest of the content of this, we heard what Greenpeace said, which is really disturbing. It's one thing if somebody is going to defend copyright rights that exist and should exist. I mean, content, without the content, the internet is essentially just dirty pictures, and even those are copyrighted. But what about Greenpeace, which could actually be politically persecuted by its own estimation of this? Do you think that the loophole that Greenpeace sees in this, these acts are in fact open and subject Greenpeace to the peril that Greenpeace thinks it does?
They're certainly raising troubling issues, but here's what's happened in the last few weeks all across the political spectrum. There's concern. If you listen to some of the Tea Party folks who've said government's too big, they realize that the internet is a way to get their message out without government. If you're talking about income inequality, something I feel strongly about, that was what Occupy Wall Street has been all about. When you look at the internet, this is a way to take on the powerful moneyed interests. So all across the political spectrum now, folks are realizing that this threat to a free and open internet is going to do great damage to American values.
I'm sure that you were as shocked as I was to hear, and I understand he has a job and you need a job after you leave the Senate, but to hear Chuck Dodd saying what he has said about this from his position with Motion Picture Association, where does his certainty come from that this is not going to be an infringement on free speech?
Well, first of all, it is a censorship bill. It's the definition of censorship. You can go out and get a court order that directs a site to not publish certain types of information. That is literally the definition of censorship. And my concern is the Motion Picture Association has long been against technological innovation. It wasn't very many years ago when they were saying that the VCR was a great threat to the movie industry. They compared it to the Boston Strangler with Women Home Alone. And it was absurd because, of course, the VCR made the movie industry a tremendous amount of money through a modern approach to distribution. What we've got to do is look at ways to ensure that we combat copyright infringement. I'm concerned about people making fake Nikes and those kinds of things. I say, you know, handcuff them. But we can do it without undermining this technological juggernaut, the internet, which has been such a force for job growth and innovation and free speech.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, as we suggested, well ahead in the growing line in the Senate against all this. Thank you kindly, sir.
Thanks for having me again.